Here we have a stamp from Singapore, the state of Singapore, issued in 1959, as we can see from the bottom of the stamp. The imagery includes a golden lion statue in the foreground, with what looks to be a municipal or government buildings in the background. The wilding photographic portrait of Queen Elizabeth II is prominently placed in the top right of the stamp, opposite to the denomination of 30 cents of the Malaya and British Borneo dollar on the left. There is a postmark, and I don't think it'll come as a surprise that this stamp was on a cover sent from Singapore in 1959. It was sent on a Monday, the 17th of August, just a couple of months after the stamp was issued. The stamp measures 34 by 26 millimeters and is bright violet in color. So this is a part of 6 stamps that were issued in 1959, varying in color and face value, which range from 4 to 50 cents. And the set is known as the New Constitution of Singapore, which gets me a little excited because most of us probably know something about Singapore. I'm sure a lot of you know something about Singapore, especially if you live within the area. But other than knowing that it's an ultra-modern independent island city that has one of the world's busiest ports, that's about it for me. So the stamp is making me ask the question, why is it referred to as the state of Singapore here? What's up with the lion? And what was Britain's role in its history? Oh, and a big question which I have only because of my exposure to stamps is, what were the Straits Settlements? Singapore was one of the Straits Settlements, and it's a very popular area within philately to collect. There's a lot to learn and figure out here. Of course, what better way to start than with a map? As we have already mentioned, Singapore is an island city which is located on the very southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. It borders Malaysia and is just 1 degree north of the equator. You can imagine that the strategic maritime significance of this location is invaluable. It is the crossroads of east-west trade, in which 1/3 of the world's shipping containers are being transshipped through there, making it the 2nd busiest port in the world. It also has one of the top 20 busiest airports in the world. With a radius of 7 hours, Singapore is accessible to many of the Asian markets and make for an ideal meetup point for global businesses. Now, while the area of Singapore is believed to have been a critical trading location for centuries, its modern history only really begins in the 1800s, when the British set up a crown colony in 1819. A British statesman by the name of Sir Stamford Raffles negotiated a treaty for the British to locate a trading port on the island. Today, there is a statue of Sir Stamford Raffles in Singapore, and this is a 1955 stamp of that statue, which just shows how important he was to Singapore's history. His statue was deserving of a stamp. Now, this was in 1819, and Sir Stamford Raffles had only seen a fishing village with approximately 200 villagers on the island. But over the next 2 to 5 years, Singapore saw a lot of early growth. It attracted Asian and Arab traders largely because Singapore was established as a free port. They were not collecting port duties. And so as word spread about this free port, more traders moved their activities to Singapore. Also, the port quickly adopted a policy influenced by Stamford Raffles to ban slavery, carry weapons, gambling, and even heavily tax the consumption of alcohol and opium. And so you can imagine that Singapore, being a port in such a critical location, would benefit from a number of key events that would happen over the next several decades, including the opening of the Suez Canal, the building of ocean-going steamships that could go further, the opening of the Chinese market, as well as the increased production and export of tin and rubber on the Malay Peninsula. Singapore was in the right place at the right time. In 1826, Singapore was actually grouped with 2 other British territories, Penang in the northwest and Malacca, situated between Penang and Singapore on the Malacca Strait. These, each with their own interesting histories, became the Straits Settlements under the administration of the British East India Company, and by 1830 was considered a subdivision of British India, which brings us to the first postage stamps used by the region. They were Indian stamps and began to be used by these three Straits settlements in 1854, just a couple of years after India began to issue its first stamps. And so you can find postal stationery used from the Straits Settlements with Indian stamps that will have either a B109 cancellation from Malacca, a B147 cancellation from Penang, or a B172 cancel from Singapore. And so if you have Indian stamps from that time, pay attention to the cancel. You may actually have a stamp that was used in the Straits Settlements. And I do. I have an 1856 2-anna stamp with a B172 cancel, meaning that it was used in Singapore. Let's check it out. The stamp itself is beautiful, although poorly centered and a bit beaten up. You can see Queen Victoria's portrait with the words East India Postage 2-anna encircling the Queen's image. And it's the cancel that I'm most excited about this stamp. You can see B172 right in the center of the stamp, which is, yes, a bit faded, but still quite visible. This is the indication that the stamp was used in Singapore. Now, this does not classify the stamp as Singapore's first stamp or even the Straits Settlements' first stamp, but it is early postal history in which Indian stamps such as this one were used in the Straits Settlements. And thanks to the socked on-the-nose B172 cancel, we know that Singapore was the origin from which this was sent. Okay, so when do the Straits Settlements actually issue their own stamps? Well, this takes place in 1867 when the administration of the Straits Settlements gets separated from India. And so, Indian stamps were then overprinted with a new value, which were in cents, and for added extravagance, another crown above the Queen's head. So she was double crowned. This is considered to be the Straits Settlements' first postage stamp to be used in Singapore, Penang, and Malacca. Shortly after, however, the Straits Settlements actually had stamps printed bearing the name, but of course continuing to feature the British monarch center stage. Now, there were some additions to the Straits Settlements during the Victorian period. The dindings on Malay were added in 1874. Christmas Island and the Coco Keeling Islands were added in 1886. And later, the island of Labuan was incorporated into the Straits Settlements in 1907. So the Straits Settlements was this collection of small British entities split across the area of over 1.5 million square kilometers. Now, of course, after Queen Victoria passed away in 1901, King Edward VII's portrait was present on all of the stamps for the Straits Settlements. And this was for the remainder of the first decade of the 20th century. And I want to pause here for a second because I came across a postcard that was sent from Singapore in 1906. And based on what we've just learned, I'm looking forward to exploring it with all of you. This is a small postcard with a photograph and message on the one side and has a documented postal journey on the other. Starting with the stamp, this is a 3-cent King Edward VII Straits Settlement stamp that is clearly a Perfin, something that we've all learned about in a previous video, link in description. The Perfin is actually upside down with the initials BMC, which belonged to Bain, Mayer & Co., a company that still exists today as Bain Mayer, a German chemical company that was founded as an overseas trading company in Singapore in 1840. And so this postcard is likely sent from an employee or somebody working with Bain Mayer & Co. in their Singapore office. We can see it was sent August 7th in 1906 in the afternoon from Singapore, based on the stamp's cancelling postmark. And then we have another 5 postmarks that highlight its journey. The postcard reached Penang, another Straits settlement, on the 9th of August in the morning, just 2 days after being sent from Singapore. After that, it reached Calcutta in the afternoon of the 14th of August, and then shot its way up to North India when it arrived in Dehradun at possibly a regional post office at 7:30 in the morning, and left 1 hour later at 8:30 to arrive in Mussoorie within Dehradun. It is incredible that this little postcard made it from Singapore to North India in 9 days, several years before airplanes actually carried mail. Amazing. Also note that the postal address had been corrected along the way by postal clerks. Anyway, what was the message on the postcard? You can see that it is an image of Collyer Quay, which is the main road in Singapore that has the enormous skyscrapers today. This is a view of it in 1906. And the message simply reads, "This port appears prettier approaching than Marseille." So this is a 1906 text message. My theory is that whoever sent this was traveling on business, maybe doing some work with or for Bain Mayer & Co., and was writing home to whoever using company dollar, well, 3 cents, to let them know that they're okay. Or simply boasting that they're in Singapore to somebody that they've traveled with to Marseille. Whatever. It's just a simple picture postcard and a nothing sentence. It definitely matches text message standards today. Okay, back to stamps. After Edward VII came George V. Of course, varying in the standard designs and including some pictorial issues. And then later, George VI was present, even through the Second World War. And this is interesting because during World War II, Singapore fell to the Japanese during the Battle of Singapore, along with the rest of the Malay Peninsula.
These are among the last pictures taken before the fall of Singapore. We released them because they are a part of British Empire history, for good or ill. But it's hard to look at them without bitterness and unrest.
The Straits Settlements were under Japanese occupation until the end of the war. During this time, the standard King George VI stamps were still used, just with various Japanese overprints, and this alone is a fascinating era of Singapore's philatelic history to collect. Of course, after the war, the British returned to the Malay Peninsula, but at this time, the Straits Settlements were to be dissolved. Malacca and Penang were to be integrated into the Federation of Malaya, present-day Malaysia. Singapore was to become a separate crown colony, and Labuan, which was briefly part of Singapore, was integrated into the new colony of British North Borneo. Now, this all didn't happen instantly, and there was an interim government administered under the British Military Administration. And so the final stamps of the Straits Settlements featured the King George VI stamps, but overprinted with BMA, British Military Administration, during this time shortly after 1945. You can see how the Straits Settlements are an attractive avenue within philately to collect. Exploring them means exploring the colonial period that was key in defining nations and relations throughout the region, and of course Singapore as we know it today. Now, Singapore's first stamps as a solo entity were using the Straits Settlements template with King George VI, only replacing Straits Settlements with Singapore. These were issued in 1948. The first stamps of Singapore, and continue to be in use until Queen Elizabeth II makes her first appearance with the beginning of her reign in 1953. There were some really great pictorials with Queen Elizabeth II's portrait issued just a couple of years later, featuring various sailing vessels and an aircraft. And this now brings us to the stamp that we pulled from the box. The State of Singapore Act of 1958 was an agreement to convert Singapore from a colony into a self-governing state. And so a self-governing Singapore was achieved the following year in 1959 when its new constitution went into effect. And these stamps were issued in celebration. Queen Elizabeth II's portrait quickly disappeared from the stamps following this issue. And several celebratory stamps featuring the flag and other imagery began to appear on the stamps monarch-free. But the state of Singapore only lasted until 1963. Singapore actually merged with its neighbor to become part of the Federation of Malaysia. And this only lasted for a couple of years because in 1965, Singapore separated to become an independent republic. While it was actually expelled or kicked out of Malaysia due to political and cultural differences, yeah, I know, I'm skimming through history here really quickly, and that's why I'll leave a number of links in the video description for you to learn more. It's really interesting. Anyway, this separation from Malaysia is when Singapore became an independent republic, and since then, this independent city republic has issued stamps about its heritage and story, its military preparedness, fauna and flora, and also stamps that have captured its progression to becoming an ultra-modern city with an incredible skyline. Now check this out, just to flex on how incredible its skyline is, Singapore issued this stamp in 2020, a panoramic view of the Marina Bay Central Business District, and chose to do it on a stamp measuring 163 millimeters wide. It is actually part of a set of two, featuring this stamp with the residential estate area. But this $2 stamp just completely captures the modern beauty that the country is known for today. Notice the lion in the top left here. It shows up on modern Singapore stamps, and a lion was indeed on the stamp that we pulled from the box. So what is the deal with lions? Well, Singapore comes from the Malay name Singapura, which is derived from the Sanskrit word for lion city. And although not entirely sure, the popular story is that a prince from southern Sumatra arrived on the island at the end of the 13th century and saw, or at least thought he saw, a lion. And so he named the place Lion City. Now, of course, this has been highly contested because it's been pointed out that no lions were known to be in this region. It was more likely a Malayan tiger or something else altogether. But regardless, the name stuck, Lion City, and so the lion has been adopted as a national symbol for the city, standing for courage, excellence, and strength. And there is also something called the Merlion, a mythical creature that has the body of a fish and the head of a lion. And this was a creation of Singapore's tourism board and is the official mascot of Singapore, combining the symbolism of the lion with the heritage and connection that Singapore has with the sea. There is actually an 8-meter high statue of the Merlion in the center of Singapore that has become a popular tourist attraction and a landmark. And I think you can see it from this panoramic stamp. It's somewhere there. We're going to have to zoom in just a little bit more to see it clearly, I think. And yep, there it is, the Merlion. This magnification is pretty good. Nice. This was another fascinating exploration of a country and its philatelic history. Links are in the video description to learn more about Singapore, the Straits Settlements, and their postage stamps. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and make sure that you are subscribed. As always, thank you for watching and happy exploring.